Welcome to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with host Lane Nordland.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cattleman's Call podcast. Lane Nordland joining you here today, and a lot of opportunities for cattle producers out in the countryside surrounding new genetic potential, and we're going to discuss some research that's helping producers be more profitable out in the countryside with their cattle herds. And joining us here today from the University of Tennessee is Dr. Troy Rowan. Dr. Rowan, you and I have talked before, but never on the podcast here. So.
Yeah, first time on the podcast, so glad to be here, Lane.
Well, we're recording this during CattleCon 26 in Nashville. What's it been like engaging with folks and presenting and speaking with everybody here this week?
Yeah, CattleCon it's always a little bit of a family reunion, right? I can't take 10 steps without running into somebody. So it's just really, really good to catch up with the full industry, producers that we work with on research projects, partners at breed associations, companies. Getting everybody under one roof is always an awesome time, so I look forward to it. It's especially nice being just up the road in Nashville.
Yeah. And when you look at that, looking back on your career, how did you come to the University of Tennessee? What set you on this track to be an aid for producers out in the countryside?
Yeah, so I grew up in southwest Iowa, just over the Missouri border on a purebred Charolais operation. Dad was a semen salesman, so I spent a lot of time riding around, breeding cows, looking through sire books, and that really jump-started my interest in genetics. I just sort of bridged that with a newfound interest in science, loved the research stuff and being able to bring those two worlds together, do stuff that has real impact on beef cattle production. It's really a dream come true. So I've been at Tennessee for about 5 years now, finished my PhD at University of Missouri, got my dream job, and we've been there 5 years already. So it's been a blast.
So one of the research topics that you are engaging cattle producers on is genetics and the environment,
right,
and how they can benefit each other, how we can use EPDs and everything else out there. I know you've done a lot of survey work and working with associations as well, breed associations, and pursuing this research. How did this idea come to light? Where did it surface? Were you talking with folks out in the countryside, talking with your parents? Where did this aha moment come on this research point?
Yeah, Lane, I think so much of the research that we do is really stimulated by interactions with producers. I think that a lot of other fields of research do things for the sake of finding stuff out, and I still have a lot of curiosity as a scientist, but if what we're doing isn't directly impacting producers, I don't see it being as valuable as it should be for our industry. So this genetics by environment interaction work has long been on producers' radars. We know that moving cattle from one environment to another, some genetics just don't work. So lots of genetics that get brought from the high plains down into the fescue belt here, and we get train wrecks, right? And so our interest there, and the team that's been working on this larger project, is how can we help reduce a little bit of that risk when we bring genetics from one environment to the other, and be a little bit more precise in matching animals to the environments and managements where they have the most likelihood to succeed.
So what were the environments that were explored? Obviously, it's not just the state of Tennessee being focused on. Right. How did you select these different environments? Who volunteered to do it? And was it easy getting volunteers?
Yeah, so this is a larger project. It's actually led by the University of Wisconsin, a number of other land grant institutions, in a partnership with the American Angus Association. So Angus would be our biggest registered cattle breed. They've got cattle spread across every type of environment that you can imagine just here in the States. And so that partnership was really our attempt to try and come at this problem from a number of different angles. So not just can we find traits that we can measure that help us identify animals that might be adapted to particular environments, but really what are we doing with our EPDs, and can we make those a little bit more tailored towards individual operations, management, and environment? So it's a really big collaboration. That we had hundreds of producers that have responded to surveys, leveraging American Angus Association's genetics and phenotypic database. And so it's a really, really big partnership. The sort of thing that we need, and of course federal funding as well. The USDA funded this project, so it's really coming from all three angles: federal, academic, and then a huge amount of industry participation, which is what we need to do to move the needle on these big problems.
So, what were some of the similar patterns that we saw across the nation, and what were some patterns that really stuck out depending on where these cattle were being raised?
Yeah, I think there's a one of the things that we're very interested in is finding indicator traits for adaptivity, right? So, what makes a cow adapted to living on toxic fescue or in a heat stressed environment or in the cold? And we found some interesting indicator traits. So, we put temperature sensors in cows this summer from Indiana to Tennessee to Missouri on toxic fescue under heat stress and tried to understand how cow body temperature fluctuated within herds. And it turns out there's a huge amount of variation. Some cows just sort of hold steady even through the middle of the heat of the day. And some cows have huge spikes in body temperature. Those are the ones that are in the pond, under the tree, not out grazing and doing what we need them to. So that was really illuminating to see the variation, even within herds that might be pretty genetically similar, a fair bit of phenotypic variation in those internal body temperatures and how those animals respond to heat stress.
So, how can this information that has been gathered and waded through impact EPDs?
Yeah, so that's the million dollar question is how do we take all this information, in particular the survey information? I guess I'll take a step back and say that so much of what we do in genetics is we try and take the environment out of our predictions. So we say, how would this animal's genetics perform in an average environment? But I always tell folks that there's no such thing as an average environment. In environment, we can take a really broad look at too. It's not just what's the temperature, what's the rainfall, what's the elevation, but you can look at two neighboring farms and how they manage their forage, how they have health protocols, whatever that looks like, can be completely different environments. So, what we were trying to do with the survey is try and tease apart some of that environmental picture that isn't captured just by a zip code. And it turns out that about 80% of the non-genetic pieces of a trait, right? So we measure a phenotype like weaning weight. 80% of the drivers of that are not related to temperature, humidity, precipitation. They're really those management things that differ from operation to operation. And so it's been really illuminating to understand just how much of that plays into the environmental piece in trying to overlay that on genetics and on those more natural environments is a huge modeling challenge. But at the end of the day, we hope that the tool that we deliver is sort of a tailored EPD, right? Input your location, input your information about how you manage health, reproduction, supplemental feeding, and you get a better prediction of the EPD of the animal that's going to work in that specific context.
Well, friends, stay with us. We are going to continue our conversation with Dr. Troy Rowan, but we're going to get a quick educational segment in with our friends from Transova. We're going to learn more about what they're doing for producers in the countryside. Stay with us. We'll be back with Dr. Rowan. But first, these words from Transova. Joining us today from Transova is Justin Rhodes and Garrett Stanfield, and we're going to be talking about better opportunities and flexibility through genetics for your cattle herd. And gentlemen, as we look at our herds out in the countryside, what are the embryo products that Transova Genetics offers beef producers, and how are these genetics selected for these producers in particular?
Yeah, yeah, Lane. Outside of directly working with producers on their own donors, we have several embryo products that we offer as well. Some of those embryo products include a core of Brahma Hereford matings, Brahma Angus mating, and an Angus back on a Hereford. Those are the core of our F1 female sexed embryo offerings that we're offering to commercial cattlemen across the U.S. In addition to that, we also have some sexed female matings within the dairy industry for those producers as well. And here developing over the past couple of years, we've also brought in a terminal embryo offering that those dairy producers have really latched onto in order to create a pure beef calf out of some of those dairy females.
And those genetics too, we've been able to source the really elite maternal genetics off of the relationships that we've built with our clients over the years, and going out and identifying genetics that really are maternal driven, and then we'll actually go on farm and phenotypically select those females. We're looking for moderate frame, big bodied, sound, super functional females, and udder quality is really important. And then we do a lot of research on the sire side as well, using high accuracy, maternally driven bulls, and really like to see the udder quality on the mothers of those bulls and that sort of thing too. So we're doing a lot of homework to make sure that these genetics are truly elite.
So when we look at the flexibility and the customization that comes with utilizing embryos, I mean, how to just selecting for environments that cattle producers are raising, their breeding goals, and of course, again, trying to just be sustainable through profitability as well.
At Transova, we're really fortunate to work with producers across industry sectors throughout the United States. And along with that becomes a lot of that mating flexibility that we're able to accomplish in some of these embryo packages. Working with those breeders, we have access to creating an embryo product really that's customizable nearly to each region across the United States. So we realize that there's really not a one size fits all approach. And I think that a lot of our goal there is to be able to create an embryo product that can go back and make replacement females that are going to fit in each region across this U.S. and make that next generation of cows even better than it is today.
Yep. And you talked about those replacement females. We're looking at a time with a historically low U.S. cattle herd. There's going to be regions in the U.S. where producers do have that opportunity to start rebuilding their herds. How vital can embryos play in that replacement and looking for quality and helping speed up that selection process that folks really want to focus on?
Yeah, Lane, you led me right into one of my thoughts that I was thinking about with the cow numbers. One of the things we've got to really focus on is being super efficient with our cattle, because we're running more cows on less ground now than we ever have, and there is going to be a time when we build it back. And so why not put yourself in the driver's seat with elite maternal genetics from day one and utilize the F1s to maximize the retained maternal heterosis and get the most bang for your buck?
Where can producers listening, watching this conversation contact a Transova rep? Where's the best resources to get a hold of one of you?
You can go to our website. It'd probably be the best place to start. All of our contact information on there. You could fill out a HubSpot inquiry, and that gets filtered to our sales team and get you into the right hands to get you talking to who you need to.
Again, Garrett, Justin, thanks for joining us here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you,
And
Lane.
we're going to hear one more word from Transova, and then we'll be back with our conversation with Dr. Troy Rowan right here on the Cattleman's Call podcast.
Elite genetics don't happen by chance. They happen by choice. Every breeding decision you make shapes the next generation and the legacy you're building. With proven IVF, ET, and genetic tools, Transova helps you move forward with confidence and consistency. From accelerating progress to enhancing the traits that set your program apart, your legacy is already in motion. Are you ready for what's next?
Again, a big thank you to our friends at Transova for sponsoring today's conversation. Again, joining us, Dr. Troy Rowan from the University of Tennessee in the podcast booth, discussing how genetics and environment and the research that's going on in these areas. We were just talking how potential we can use this for EPDs and help influence our decisions and where we're raising cattle and the genetics that we're buying. So let's talk about the interactions and how they really are manifesting for our commercial herds. And because cow-calf producers, that is the meat for the seed stock producers as well. That's the meat of their business, our us commercial guys in the countryside. So what are some of the key things that you're seeing that are significantly influencing genetic expression in all of this research that is being compiled? And you're still going through a lot of this,
For sure.
the information, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, this research is very much early stages, but I think that our genetic improvement programs, breed associations, we've sort of re-understood in the last few years that, hey, commercial data and the commercial focus is really, really important, right? If we're not making progress on the traits that matter to our commercial customers, we're really not moving the needle in the larger industry. And so I think for commercial producers, really what they're trying to optimize is how can they make cattle that effectively utilize their forage resources, right? We've got to scale our efficiencies based on forage rather than just based on number of head, right? That's something that I really, really try and drive home with our commercial producers in this state, that the limiting factor of your operation isn't how many head you've got, it's how many acres of grazable forage do you have, and how can you place genetics in that context that are going to optimize the productivity of that whole system. And so a lot of what we're doing, I think, in the larger industry is we have this sort of renewed focus on cow efficiency. So what does an efficient cow look like? And that's just multifaceted. It's not just a matter of how much does that cow eat, but it's reproductive efficiency. It's a cow who's long lived, who's got a good udder, right? We don't want her falling out of the herd early. We want her to be moderately framed, right? But raise that big calf that's demanded upstream by the packers. And so, again, it's really trying to thread a needle of making cows that are putting that grass to good use and raising a big calf every year. And environmental adaptation is a big piece of that, right? We don't want to put cows in situations where they're going to fall apart, where if you put them in another one, they might be a little bit better off. So again, all of this is about being more precise and putting genetics in the right context to succeed.
Well, we all want our entire herd to have cows that don't owe us anything.
For sure. Exactly. Exactly.
And so obviously there's always new EPDs coming out.
Yep.
And we're always flipping in the catalog saying, okay, what's this new EPD?
Yep.
So what is the overall goal in how these commercial producers can look at this information, make quick decisions, and differentiate them from other EPDs that they may be looking at? What is the overall goal there?
Yeah, I think that we a lot of times run into this sort of information overload when it comes to EPDs, right? We're, as animal geneticists, if there's a trait that's heritable, it's economically relevant, and we can measure enough records, we're going to try and make an EPD for it, right? We want tools in producers' hands, as many knobs as they can have to turn, the better. But for a lot of folks, that's information overload. You flip open that sire selection book, and you've got 30 different numbers that you're looking at. That's a huge amount of information, and it's impossible to tease through. So our best tools to address that challenge, I think, are economic selection indexes, your dollar values. Those distill down a whole bunch of traits into a single value, and that value is the difference in profitability between animals. So those are awesome tools for us, because they allow us to select on one number instead of 30, and they're optimized to maximize profit at the commercial herd level. So as we sort of develop these tools that are maybe more environment aware out, still the best way to get that selection done is going to be through those indexes, but they'll be able to sort of weight things a little bit more regionally, maybe be a little bit more specific in matching those profitable genetics to the environments in which they're going to be the most profitable.
Now, obviously, we've focused a lot of this conversation on the commercial end of things.
For sure.
Let's go over to the seed stock end of things.
You bet.
How can the seed stock guys and gals focus on this research and utilize that in their selection?
Yeah, I think that the seed stock industry would benefit from these sort of tailor-made, environment-aware EPDs, because if I'm a seed stock breeder in Tennessee and there's a bull that really nicely fits my breeding program, but he was born in Montana, I'm considering bringing those genetics into my herd. With these sort of tools that are environment aware, we can get a better idea if those genetics are going to hold up when we put them in our specific environment, right? So it sort of widens the pool of genetics that as a seed stock producer I can pull from, but it makes sure that those genetics that I'm bringing in, even if they're not from my region, are going to be more adapted and able to handle whatever environmental stressors I'm up against. So, yeah.
And talking about those environmental stressors, how can producers better use EPDs to focus on heat resistance,
Sure.
on tolerance, on drought issues? Because we're always in a drought somewhere in the U.S.
Exactly.
too. How can we all better utilize these EPDs?
Yeah, so we actually have some EPDs. I'll speak to American Angus Association, a couple of different EPDs for adaptability traits. So the pulmonary arterial pressure EPD, that's a prediction of basically blood pressure, very important for cattle that are grazing at elevation. That tool has been out for 4 or 5 years now. Hugely helps those folks that have cattle at elevation pick sires that are going to be more likely to have offspring that don't suffer from brisket disease. The other one would be hair shedding, which is much more important in our part of the world here. How early does that cow shuck her winter hair coat off? That tool has been really useful for folks in the fescue belt and southeast, identifying animals who've got a predisposition to be ready for that early summer heat and toxic fescue stress. So those are just 2 examples of adaptive traits that we have EPDs for that allow you, again, to pull genetics from outside your region maybe that are going to be more likely to succeed, or at least not be a train wreck when you bring them into your environmentally stressful area.
So how do we balance the bull selection when we're looking at phenotype and genotype, and then try to balance that with this environmental factor?
Yeah, no, that's the $1 million question, right? Is that we can't view any of these single things in a vacuum, right? We can't just look at phenotype. I love good-looking cattle, and good-looking cattle are important, right? We're selling these animals at auction in particular. We still have to keep an eye on those things that we don't have EPDs for, right? So if I'm a breed that doesn't have an EPD for structural soundness, I've got to be really critical on the bulls that I'm bringing in there, understanding that their offspring are going to be reflections of them in that way. But again, EPDs are very useful for the traits that we have them for. So if we can have an idea about how a bull's daughters will look 10 years in the future, that's hugely valuable before we make that investment in the bull. So it's really risk mitigation on the EPD side, but we can't forget doing our sound phenotypic evaluation, best practices in livestock evaluation as we're going out and selecting a bull.
Has there been something that's really surprised you and your colleagues going through this data?
Yeah, I think we've been really surprised looking through the survey data at just how variable our management interventions are, even at the seed stock level. We always group seed stock producers together and say, oh, they manage very intensively, but there's the full spectrum of management intensity. A lot of these seed stock herds that are, not much supplemental feeding, they're pushing them pretty hard, and then others that are quite pampered, right? So there's a huge amount of spread in how our seed stock producers are managing their cattle, even if they're physically close to one another, right? So again, that fence that divides places that have the same zip code, the same natural environment, can look very, very different from a management standpoint.
So if folks are interested in the ongoing studies, are there currently some papers out that folks can start to ruminate over and look at, or is this this is probably the best resource listening to this podcast?
Listen to this podcast is a good start. We're still in the early stages, right? Coming through that survey data and trying to integrate it into the genetic prediction piece. And this, I always like to say, this is a really long ways away from actual implementation. Early stages, basic research, but you'll start to see some papers come out. We have a website that's resilientbeef.tennessee.edu. We try and compile all of our extension resources, research papers, talks that we give. This podcast will be up there at some point. So if folks are more interested in sort of the full scope of the project, would point them to that website.
Yeah. Well, again, Troy, thanks for joining us here today. And we look forward to maybe a follow-up on when more of this research and the findings officially come out.
You bet. Well, I appreciate you having me, Lane, and look forward to sharing more in the future.
All right. Thanks for joining us. And thank you to our listeners and viewers joining us here on the Cattleman's Call podcast. Make sure and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you enjoy podcasts. We appreciate your subscription here today. That will do it for this edition of the Cattleman's Call podcast. I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to NCBA's Cattleman's Call podcast with Lane Nordlund. For more information, visit ncba.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast today.